Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Noah Torres. I am a policy analyst here at the Texas Public Policy Foundation on the Family Success Project. And I apologize for my voice. I've been talking about policy way too much these past 3 days, and I've lost it. So I will do my best to be audible. Anyways, today we're going to be discussing a critical topic in family policy. And it is a topic of outsized importance, and that is the relationship between law, policy, cultural attitudes, and human behaviors. So to start this discussion, I would like to reference a 1989 book by the conservative family law jurist Marianne Glendon, The Transformation of Family Law. And in Glendon's book, I believe she starts with an excellent quote, and I'll quote her here. "Law is an outcome of social forces and a force which in turn influences people in society and influences their habits and their convictions." In other words, as much as law influences our behavior, either coercively or persuasively, the family is a particularly unique and emotional space, and it makes the social force of individual attitudes and ideas and perceptions about the family at times even more persuasive than what the law says about the family. And in Glendon's book, she starts with an excellent story that I'm going to highlight real quick to just kind of explore and introduce us to the idea of this relationship between law, policy, cultural attitudes, and behavior. So Glendon cites a late 19th century Irish poem by the Irish poet John Synge, The Tinkerer's Wedding. This poem focuses on two tinkerers, two silverware smiths, Michael and Sarah. They've been in a relationship for quite some time, and then one day, Sarah turns to Michael and says, "I'd like to get married. I'd like to find a priest. I'd like us to get married." And Michael simply says, "Why? Who cares? We've been going on our own ways for as long as we have. We're married according to the traditions of Irish travelers, and we've had a relationship of some duration together for some time. Why do we need to get married in the church? Why do we need to get married in the eyes of the state?" The couple, they eventually find a priest. They argue with him over the logistics of the marriage ceremony, and they actually beat him up, and they leave him in a ditch. Well, as they're leaving, Michael's lamenting to Sarah, "Why do you care about getting married? It's not going to make you prettier. It's not going to make you more rich. It's not going to do anything for you. It's just a ring." And he takes the ring, and he throws it in the ditch with the priest. So this story reveals two things to us. One, for some people like Sarah, the engagement with legal institutions such as marriage, and at the time, the law was actively promoting marriage, both in the church and the state in Ireland. Sometimes that law is persuasive of our behaviors. And then other times for people like Michael, it just simply doesn't matter. The law could tell you what to do. He just doesn't care. And, at the time, obviously, the law was promotive of marriage in Ireland, but things are a little bit different now. We have many more Michaels and far less Sarahs. And, one thing I will say, as much as Michael was butting up against a law, and that law that he was butting up against was at the time religious regulations in the Catholic Church that required public marriages, he didn't see a need for this. It's suffice to say this is an example of the influence of law at the time when this was first passed in 1563. The very first requirement of public marriages that was resisted significantly. And just to show how persuasive it was, I think almost everyone here would like to have a marriage with people witnessing it and someone officiating your wedding instead of just simply consenting between a husband and a wife. But anyways, this story aside, a couple of stats that we're going to start with and we'll introduce our panelists. There are 5.8 marriages per 1,000 residents in the state of Texas. Nearly 3/4 of Texans agree that it is personally important for them to get married, but only less than half believe that the government should actually incentivize marriage. So what we see now is, again, we have many more Michaels in our world. We have many more people who are agnostic about the idea of the good of marriage, or that the state should have anything to do with marriage. And even the law itself, over probably the past 70 years, has moved from actively promoting marriage and actively viewing the family as a cohesive unit to merely viewing it as a collection of individuals with competing interests between parents, between spouses, and even between parents and their children. So that leaves us with a critical question today. If we recognize that when culture and law go together, it's both more persuasive and it can influence behavior, and when law and culture are going in opposite directions, the law is less persuasive and individual preferences simply override whatever good idea or notion of goodness that the law seeks to cultivate, people simply won't behave. Or, well, cohere. Behave is probably not the right word. That leaves us then with a two-front challenge. The relationship between law and policy, law and policy and culture. How do we make our laws better to better promote marriage? And how do we recognize that culture is part of that? So how can law and policy and culture in a triangular relationship all relate together? And that's the question that we're going to address today. So to start, I'd like to introduce our panelists. At the end of the line, we have Carl Caton. Carl is the president of the Marriage Initiative, president of the San Antonio Marriage Initiative, and he is currently the chair, of the Texas Commission on Marriage and Families. Carl got his bachelor's in business administration at Angelo State University, and he's married to his wife, Kelly. Together they have two children and 5 grandchildren. Yep. Excellent. And then next, we have Representative Caroline Fairley. She represents District 87, and she is born and raised in Amarillo, Texas. Representative Fairley has served on House Appropriations, local consent calendars, and natural resource committees, as well as a select committee on civil discourse and freedom of speech in higher education. She's also part of the 1836 Project Advisory Committee, where she contributes to initiatives focused on Texas civic education. Representative Fairley works at Occunet Company as a medical negotiator, aiming to reduce healthcare costs for Texas families, and is a graduate of Abilene Christian University. And finally, we're joined by Senator Hagenbu, who represents District 30. A longtime owner, Senator Hagenbu is a chairman and owner of Titus Transport, a leader in transportation services, and is owner of Giddy Up Transport, a freight logistics firm. Senator Hagenbu previously served as an officer in the U.S. Navy Civil Engineer Corps during the Cold War and during the Gulf War, and is a company commander in Naval Mobile Construction Battalion 4, and as an instructor at the Civil Engineers Officer School. Senator Hagenbu received his B.S. Mechanical Engineering from Naval Academy, a Master's in Civil Engineering from Stanford University, and an MBA from the University of California, Los Angeles. He's married to Jean, his wife of 39 years, and they have 2 children and 3 grandchildren. Welcome to all of our panelists. So, as we begin, I'd like to start with a question for each of you, and we could just go down the line, or whoever would like to speak first. I want to highlight again some of the polling data that I just mentioned. 75% of Texans say it's personally important for them to marry. 73% agree that marriage improves one's quality of life, yet and only 15% of Texans think that marriage is outdated. Yet, again, less than half of Texans believe that the government has any business in incentivizing marriage. And this is also divided along age and sex lines. Typically, younger men tend to be more in favor of incentives for marriage. So in light of these data points, in light of these trends, I'd like to ask each of you, what cultural and social attitudes do you think are explaining why some might want to marry and why some people simply just don't want to marry?
I'll go first. Let's see. There we go. Hear me? Howdy, y'all. Glad to be here today. So when we talk about societal or cultural norms and how this impacts marriage, I'm the youngest state rep in Texas here. I'm 27 years old. Oftentimes people think I'm still in high school when I meet them. But this is such an interesting topic to me because ultimately I think, the woke left, they try so hard to have this ideology that you, men and women, are the same. There's no difference. That you can be and feel and act who you want. So if you're a boy and you wake up and one day you want to be a girl, you can be a girl. And that type of ideology, it totally undermines the nuclear family, what we believe as conservatives, that we're pro-family, that we're pro-reproduction and want to have kids. And when the left ultimately is trying to devalue men and women and the roles that they have in marriage, I think they do a pretty good job of it. And I think that we in Texas have to be ensured that we make sure that nuclear family, that we protect it. The second point is, so I'm from Amarillo, and I was talking with some young women that are around my age in Amarillo, and we were talking about some are getting married, some aren't getting married, and just talking about this topic. And it was interesting because they said, well, I don't really want to get married because I have a great life. I have a great career. I'm making plenty of money. I'm kind of nervous about commitment or all of these fears. And I think that ideology of it's kind of all about me. And in my generation, you see that a lot. You see people, they're comfortable. They don't want to give up maybe what they're doing to commit to somebody else and have a life and a family. And so when we talk about societal norms, those are the two things that come to mind.
Good answer. I can build that a little bit. I think a couple of things that are leading to this is, one, I'll talk about the capstone and the cornerstone type of perspective on marriage. But also this idea, my son's in his 30s, and he lives in L.A., he's a TV actor, but he'd like to get back to Texas, but he has a pretty good handle on culture. So you have a better understanding of this, but talking to him, he talks about that young people feel like it's just a terrible world to bring somebody up in, and it has to do, I think, a lot of the liberal themes of climate crisis, we're racist, we have police are bad, all those things, be afraid. It's not a good place to bring up children. Let me talk about those two real quickly. First, this idea of cornerstone versus capstone marriage. There's sociologists in recent, many years have pushed this idea of a capstone marriage, which is, like a building. The capstone's at the very top. So you build your life all the way up, like your friend, get your career in place, your education, your career, all those things, and then finally, like icing on top of the cake, you put the capstone on. That's when you get married. The traditional view is like a cornerstone. It's the base of the building that you build. You get married earlier, and you build your marriage together. It's not the icing; it's the cake itself. My wife and I were married. We met in the Navy in Nicomedia, Greece, many years ago. I would say it was romantic there, and she wasn't in her right mind. But anyways, and this was so we were a military family, so we had to move from place to place. And the Bible says to leave and cleave. It forced us to do that. We didn't have family around. It was Jean and I against the world, and we went through all the ups and downs of life together. Now married 41 years, and we're life partners. I don't know why you think about life partner, but you don't marry them and live your life together. So that's a whole concept there. And then this concept of it's a terrible world, I think is a misconception because of some of the liberal type themes that people hear. Well, the truth is that I was listening to a historian say that if you were a king 100 or 200 years ago and you could live as even a lower-class American now, you choose a lower-class American. It's a misnomer that this is a pretty dang good place to live right now if you look at it realistically, but that's their perceptions. And let me just say one other one, is that he says that men and women are pitted against each other, kind of two armed camps against each other. And the young women often don't trust the young men because they think they're just out for their personal pleasure. I think there's some of that's true that we've had because of explicit sites, because of cheap dating sites. Young men have taken that direction, and that's a problem in our society also that is part of this, what's going on here.
Yeah, no, I would just step into that. Your question really references the conflicting and overlapping realities, and this is a really confusing and it's a very disorienting time for all of us right now. And the reason is we're not paying attention, that we are in the middle of a profound cultural inflection point. I'm 65, I've never lived through a cultural inflection point. We are in the middle of that. And the Marriage Initiative took over National Marriage Week a few years ago. I don't pay much of any attention to culture. I knew I was out of my league. So we hired a brilliant guy, Dr. David John Seal, and he was the Director of Cultural Engagement from the John Templeton Foundation, and he wrote a whole series of essays for us. And I just want to quote something from his essay because I think it really speaks very accurately into this. Dr. Seal says, marriage is in a cultural conundrum. It is viewed today as both important and irrelevant. This creates tension from three conflicting and overlapping realities. Number one, the cultural narrative surrounding marriage is uniformly negative. Marriage is being widely abandoned. How many thousand times have you heard that statement? And yet, number two, the human longing for belonging and relational security is actually increasing. The need for something like marriage is actually growing. Fascinating concept. And number three, the social science data indicates the cultural narrative is wrong and that marriage is an important solution for human flourishing and belonging. Isn't that interesting? So culture is telling us two things. Number one, marriage is irrelevant, but we need it more than ever. You feel the tension in that? You feel why that's so disorienting? Do you see when you get all these different conflicting news reports and everybody from the left, right, middle, whatever, it's very confusing. As humans, this is what I've learned about cultural inflection points. As a human being living during a cultural inflection point, it feels, notice I said feels, it feels disorienting. Does it feel disorienting to you? It does to me.
Thank you, all of you. Excellent. Carl, I want to jump further into the point about this cultural renaissance, human longing, and how that has the capacity to change our culture. Can you explain a little bit more about, pain, longing, the human experience, how that changes hearts and minds on this issue?
Yeah, I spoke in D.C. last year, and I chose a very profound and maybe provocative title. I titled the message, "The Emerging Marriage Renaissance." And I stumbled upon this because I'm an avid reader of U.S. history. I've read all the Pulitzers, excluding wars, on U.S. history. And I read an incredible book about the Progressive Era. And I learned something really fascinating because on February 19th, 1906, the National Congress for Uniform Divorce Laws, 1906? Yes, the National Conference on Uniform Divorce Laws is convened in Philadelphia at the request of Teddy Roosevelt. He was responding to a problem that was 20 years in the making, because in 1889, the U.S. for the first time led the world in divorce. And in the decade that followed, from 1890 to 1900, the divorce rate in the United States quadrupled. It was described as a divorce epidemic had hit our country. And newspaper writers of the day were writing that the demise of the family was imminent. And what was actually going on was our country had gone through another cultural inflection point in 1870. Because up until 1870, we were a culture that valued human connection. But during the Progressive Era, our human longings shifted towards autonomy. And autonomy is a good thing. Autonomy means like personal agency, independence, make your own way, find your own way. Autonomy is a good thing. But when the pendulum swings too far, when it swings beyond kind of our biology and our desire for connection, we begin to feel tension. That same thing was happening in the year 2000. We read these books by Robert Putnam and all these others, and even in the Surgeon General declares an epidemic of loneliness. So I think there have been 4 significant cultural inflection points around marriage: 1870, 1917, 1969, and 2020. And I'm bringing you this information because what we're living through isn't new. And what we believe will happen going forward may be very different than what we expect. Because if you had gone to the National Conference on Uniform Divorce Laws in 1906, you would have expected that the demise of the family would be imminent. But World War II came. As a culture, we decided we longed more for connection, and it launched a 50-year renaissance in marriage, peaking in 1946, passing all-time records. So the point is that don't assume, because all of our lived experience is in a world of declining marriage and divorce, that this is going to continue on together. I think we are in an exciting new season for marriage, for family, for relationships. That's going to be very different than what we've experienced in the past.
Absolutely. I think probably the most important lesson from Carl's remarks is that there's nothing new under the sun, and that we have gone through this many, many times, as he just said, the past century, even before that. Again, for whatever reason, humans and marriage, it's such an intensely personal union that we're stubborn, and sometimes it's for whatever reason we just don't want to adhere to norms that might even benefit us. But on that note, Senator Hagenbill, I'd like to go back to your remarks about Gen Z and their feelings about the world being a terrible place to marry. Just these cultural attitudes, and perhaps this is cyclical, but what do you think is the best way, from your perspective, that we try to understand where they're coming from about why the world is a terrible place, help them understand why the world may not be such a terrible place, and why marriage is not at odds and actually would help promote their good in spite of whatever the condition of the world is?
Thank you. I gave you a lot of my answer already, I think. But I talked about the reasons that I think that's come about, the liberal points of view that have kind of driven that perspective. And I've talked about, I think historically that's inaccurate, but that doesn't matter if that's the way young people feel. So, and I don't think government necessarily can be the leader in this, but it can help. I do think that they have it's realistic that they believe affordability is a problem, and we know that. So we can do some things around affordability, and we did in the last session. Plan to do more in this session around that for young people. We can stop things that get in the way of marriage, tax laws, welfare laws that make it an advantage to be married, if you're, those kinds of things. We can try to teach people the success sequence, which is education, make a job, marriage, and then children. And people who do that, 90+% have a stable life. That's not necessarily even a moral teaching, that's just the facts, and we can teach that to young people. So there's a number of things I think that we can do to send the signals, to get out of the way of marriage, and to send signals that marriage is important, and it's normal, it's acceptable, it's doable. We can try to send those signals, but in the end, we need families and churches to pick up on those things.
Absolutely, sir. Thank you. Representative Fairley, Senator Hagenby, you mentioned churches. You're a woman of faith, and your faith has profoundly influenced the course of your life. How do you think our churches, our faith communities, for believers and non-believers alike, can help change cultural attitudes about marriage, about family formation?
Well, I think it's pretty direct. I think the church really, it's everything. I mean, this idea of marriage, it originated by God. God created marriage. He created Adam and Eve, and they became one flesh. And so when we look at how the church influences marriage, I think it starts from the church. I think it starts from the Bible. And when you look at Scripture in the Bible, I mean, it clearly gives us a guidebook on marriage, on infidelity, on divorce, on purity before marriage, on childbearing and raising kids, on honoring your parents, all of these ideologies we believe. And so, conservatives didn't come up with the idea of marriage. Democrats didn't come up with the idea of marriage. It was God. It was the church. And so, I think it's pretty direct. I think when we talk about how the church has an impact, I think it has a huge impact. I think families going to church on Sundays and engaging their kids and families, I think when you talk about even the church as a whole, it's a sense of community and belonging. And the other thing I think is interesting about church is it's not about yourself. When you go to church, you are focused on something, either serving, you're focused on community groups, you're focused on maybe, being mentored, but you're really focused on how do we come and know God and serve, and then how do we go out into the world and be a light. And so I ultimately think church and God has everything to do with marriage and how it can impact culture.
Absolutely. And I think even on a similar point, to kind of build off of even this morning's remarks by Scott Jennings, is that, Christianity has been so influential in the formation of our culture, so influential in the formation of our Western culture, and even really influential in our culture and our understanding of marriage. Basically all of family law, secular, not secular, churches, not from churches, really is a product of Christian ideas and norms about marriage. And I think it's important for us to remember that even for believers and non-believers alike, that the most non-sectarian wedding has been, informed by these ideas, and that these ideas need to be comprehensively, constructively dealt with by policymakers, by academics, by politicians, by lawyers alike, because they define, to this day, even if they were made up 1,500 years ago, 2,000 years ago, they define, to this day, the experiences of many individuals in marriage and in family life. So they're still an essential part of our existence. But continuing on the topic of churches, Carl, in your role at the Marriage Initiative, you've done a lot of outreach and work with church communities throughout San Antonio. And this has involved outreach into communities. And, do you think that policy involvement in the world of communities, policy interventions that relate to community life, do you think trying to improve the community around the family might be one of the better ways to help improve cultural images and attitudes about the family?
Yeah, I think community plays a really vastly important role. And I come at this world because I was in the real estate business for 42 years. I was a custom home builder for 25 years. And when you're doing that, you're bringing a lot of people together to get a project done, right? And so as we looked at San Antonio, which was, we call it our laboratory, in our laboratory, we realized there's 400,000 marriages in San Antonio. Research indicates that 20% of those marriages are struggling. That's 80,000 struggling marriages. 9,000 couples will file for divorce this year. The taxpayer cost of divorce is $38,000 per family. Why is that? It's because 70% of that money is juvenile incarceration. It's expensive to put kids in prison, okay? That's the facts, okay? So it's a $300 million a year problem in San Antonio that nobody's talking about. So we knew in the very beginning, I knew from my home building background, you're not going to build a house that big with just a couple of people on your job site. You're going to need the whole community working together. So we never began our work in San Antonio with this idea that we were going to start a little program and we're going to reach 300 families. No, we wanted to change the trajectory of San Antonio. And the way we did that was creating a marriage movement across the city. So when we think about engaging communities, what we think about is how do we mobilize people in 100 different roles in 10 different sectors of our community. I've spoken to 2,000 people in San Antonio who've told me they care deeply about marriage. And we have launched the biggest marriage movement in the country. We have over 200 events for marriage in San Antonio per year. Our divorce rate in 2023 was down by 8.5%. In 2024 is down by 15%. How do you do that? Well, you do it because God's at work, right? And we're very clear. I want to be very clear. We say we believe God desires to redeem and restore marriages in San Antonio by his power and for his glory. And the reason I love that statement because it doesn't say anything about me, it doesn't say anything about us. God is doing the work of redeeming and restoring marriages with or without us, okay? And so I believe community plays a really powerful role. And I'm going to switch hats. I'm going to put on my chair of the commission hat. I believe I am pushing for 3 emphasis in the commission. I want us to prioritize prevention. We have got to begin intervening in the lives of families before their most desperate moment. When we wait until a family is at their most desperate moment, we don't even know what that cost. Alabama has done a pretty good job of estimating the cost. They say in Alabama, they say the cost related to each case of child abuse is $800,000. Well, I'm a businessman. I can help 2,000 families prevent getting to that desperate place. We've got to change how we think about how we're allocating resources. We're allocating our resources in our state to the most expensive solutions. For one family, we can help 2,000 families. There's this whole world of thinking called effective altruism, and it says we got to continue to feel with our hearts, but we got to start thinking with our heads, people. We've got to start realizing we have all the money we need in Texas. The federal government gives us, am I going off the rail here?
You're good, Carl. You're good.
The federal government created a brilliant government policy. I don't say those 3 words together very often. But they did. It's called TANF. Because in 1996, President Clinton wanted to reform welfare. He created TANF. And the brilliance of it is like, let's help people restore their families. So 3 of the 4 purposes of TANF is family strengthening. We get $500 million a year from the federal government for family strengthening. And we're spending most all of it in the downstream, most expensive ways of intervening in the lives of families. And I know, I talk to folks about family strengthening and what's the government's role, and I hear this thing really often. It says, well, we don't want to we don't want to intrude the private lives of families. I'm like, we are, okay? Because we got 40,000 people working in criminal justice. We got 44,000 people working in health and human services. We're intervening in the private lives of families. We're just not intervening in the way that helps them most. Listen to this. This is called an iron law. When families fail, government grows. Ever thought about that? When families fail, government grows. So we say, well, we're not going to do anything to come alongside families. Well, you better get ready to scale up the government because you're going to have to come alongside them. People have to be incarcerated, don't they? You got to take kids out of homes. And once you take kids out of homes, you got to find a place for them to live. You got to scale up something if you're not going to do the preventive work. So I, 3 emphasis on the commission. We got to prioritize prevention. We've got to decentralize solutions. It is people in local communities who best know the problems that they have and the best ways to overcome them, okay? And thirdly, we've got to reframe how we think about family in Texas. We don't know how to talk about family in Texas. And we've got to reframe how we're thinking about families and how we're talking about families. And we've got to rethink how we use policy in the family arena. Because you said the word earlier, I'll say this last. You said the word incentive. You don't incentivize families in the same way you incentivize businesses, insurance companies. You incentivize businesses through economic incentives. Economic incentives don't work in the family setting because you're dealing with the emotional, the relational aspect of what motivates people.
Absolutely, couldn't have said it better, Carl. Excellent. Senator Agenbu, I want to jump to you on the topic of communities, and I know you mentioned the success sequence a little bit earlier. Can you describe to the audience exactly, how you envision the success sequence as part of our, our academic communities throughout Texas for young people? How do you envision that being such a critical role in changing the attitudes and minds of young people?
Good, appreciate that. And I'm the vice chair of the Higher Education Committee and also in the K through 12 Education Committee. So this is a very important area to me. Let me say first, though, that there's some things I think the government can do and we can do in our schools. But I do believe that very good. Those policies you talked about and the results you had is fantastic. And I agree with you both that it starts with God and the church. And we pray for revival. The things that you're doing and what God can do are more important than anything we can do in the legislature. But still, we can do some things. The schools, in terms of the schools, I do believe that they can be part of it, can help. But I think first we got to remember that to give our children great education. The 3 R's when they're young, to be problem solving when they're older, to be able to get a good job, and they have the American dream. And that does help with, I think, alleviate some of these affordability concerns and helps to some degree at least sort of enables a marriage. But there are some things I think we can do in the schools. One is to get out of the way of marriage, and so things that teach against traditional marriage. So we implemented, we passed SB 12 and SB 37. One was for K-12, one was for higher education, both getting rid of DEI in the schools, K-12 and higher education. That's important because those things are teaching alternate lifestyles, pushing those kinds of things. SB 12 also had a Parents' Bill of Rights in there, which is more bringing parents in alongside. Parents can have more transparency. They can know what kind of sex ed classes are being taught and opt out if they choose. So these are important things that the school can do to stop this teaching against marriage. I think we can do some things to help people see that marriage is normal, it's affordable, it's making you successful. So the success, back to the success sequence, teaching education, job, get married before you have children, and you know that relatively early in life, and you'll have success. And there's a survey that says that 79% of Texans believe we should teach that in our schools. Another area is, I believe, is kids have been desocialized by all the screen time and all that. So the Texas TEKS has a course that's elective on relationships and finance and that kind of thing. I think maybe we should make that kind of thing mandatory and talk about traditional marriage and to some degree in the success sequence. I think those things are also some things that we can do. Again, but those can help. They can get the schools out of the way of traditional marriage. We can at least let people know it's normal, and then make room for the church and the family to take it from there.
Absolutely, sir. Parental rights are probably, I'm happy you mentioned them, are probably one of the most important things for us to remember here in the educational space. When we talk about marriage and family promotion in the schools, parents are your primary teachers. They're the primary teachers, they're the primary educators of children. That arises from an obligation that they have to ensure that their kids lead a fulfilling life. And part of that fulfilling life for many of them will be a life of marriage and will be a life of having a family. So I'm very happy that you said that, and we definitely have to remember the role of our parents in that as well. But I mentioned social media. Representative Fairley, I want to turn to you now. Last session, you had authored HB 186, which had addressed social media use by minors. And do you believe that social media has been a positive or negative influence on young people's conceptions or cultural attitudes towards marriage? And what's the right way for policy to interact with social media on this issue, and even for kids to interact with social media on this issue?
Well, first off, there's no question that social media directly impacts a generation's viewpoint on marriage. And I'll touch on this. So I was thankful to get to pass the phone-free schools bill. And I'll tell you, I had quite a few young people very angry at me, but now I think they're a little okay. But one really impactful story that I had come from that, because I do believe, as lawmakers, we have to protect young children. I think that is part of our job. And I think there's a line on not over-regulating, but also giving parents tools and then also protecting young eyes. And so with phone-free schools, I think because it went, this last school year, it was implemented. And so far, since we're almost done with the first school year, it's been amazing stories back from teachers and educators and even students saying, I'm so glad I didn't know I needed this. And one story in particular I think was really impactful about how laws can protect children and I think do impact culture is when Charlie Kirk was assassinated. Horrible. I'm sure you guys saw. There was a video circulating of just the direct shot, and it was very graphic. I don't know if you guys saw that, but it was circulating online that day. And I had several parents to call me and tell me and call our office and tell other people we knew and said, man, Caroline, had the phones not been up, my kid would have saw that video, that horrible, graphic, bloody video that probably wasn't appropriate for them. And because there weren't phones in schools, when I picked my kid up, I got to tell them about this horrible thing that had happened to Charlie Kirk. And I got to be the parent to help and communicate with them instead of some other kid or another teacher or social media or any of that. And I thought that was such an incredible example of just, it took such a team effort to get that done amongst the, Senate and also the House. But how policies can totally impact culture and also empower parents to do a good job. And so when we talk about legislation and laws and social media and how that looks, I have a few thoughts on this. One, I think there is a fine line between making sure we don't regulate. I don't personally want the law to parent our children. And I also think, though, we can incentivize and we can empower parents to have tools in their toolboxes. We talk about phone-free schools. We talk about the App Store Accountability Act that allows parents to approve or deny apps that their kids are on. And so there are a lot of laws that we can look at that do empower culture and impact culture. And I think as lawmakers, it is our job to protect young eyes and to protect young children. The other thing I'll say is ultimately, I think parents have to be engaged. I think social media will be around forever. I'm sure it will look a lot different in 10 years, but we need parents, despite what's happening on social media, to engage with their children and to protect them. We need parents who believe and instill values of the idea of this nuclear family, that instill biblical values, that take their kids to church, because we can pass laws all day long. But I think that ultimately it starts with parents being engaged with their kids at home, having a relationship with them, being okay that you might look a little bit different, not giving your kid a phone at 10 years old. And I think things like that. And a lot of that comes from y'all. Like I'm the youngest of 5. I have 4 older siblings, and the oldest and I are 13 years apart. So to give some context, when I was graduating kindergarten, he was graduating high school. And so I don't have a lot of memories growing up, but I do remember the values my parents instilled with me. They started at home, went to a great school, we went to church, but all of the things I believe now they really started from what my parents taught me, like, and there were things that my parents did that looked different than my friends. And they explained to me, we're not seeing this movie because it has these scenes that we don't think are appropriate. Or we're not going to let you have a phone at 10 years old. Or there were all those things that they educated me, and they started when I was at home. And so I think the legislation and families can work together really well. And we obviously want to be a part of that.
Absolutely. I think something in your response and then everything that we've discussed thus far this morning centers on something intensely relational. So as much as we talk about legal and economic ties between the members of the family and how those may have been loosened or how those may have been strengthened, part of the ties that will remain and have to remain are things that really bind us together or bind our families together, bind our communities together, are relational ties. And it seems like almost that those relational ties, preserving those relational ties, maintaining and even reproducing future relational ties insofar as more people have families down the line, is essential for the flourishing not only of Texas families, but of Texas. So, and this is a question for each of you, so in whatever order y'all would like to answer, do we risk creating, if marriage continues on the decline, or we don't try to engage our culture and our law and our policy, do we risk creating a generation of people who are both incapable of engaging in civic life, and do we risk creating a generation of people who are incapable of sustaining personal relationships that are essential for those families and then for the broader community that those families live in?
Well, I would love to jump into that question. And again, it goes back to all this fabulous reading I've done. Thank the Lord for all these Pulitzer Prize winners because they keep me engaged. I'm going to say something that I think is kind of humorous, is that, when people hear that I work in the marriage space, the response is typically, good boy, you're doing good work. I don't think we take seriously the value of what we're creating here. And when my work in the marriage space and building space converged with my understanding of history, one of the things that began to dawn on me was this statement that I started saying a lot recently, and that is, the strength of a nation is built upon the character of its people. And the character of its people is formed and forged. I love the word forged. Forged in the homes of its families. This girl right here, she told that story of her parents. That here it is. You want more of this? Strengthen your families. I met you 2 years ago, and I didn't know this was going to happen. I am so proud of you, if I can say that. You're a remarkable young lady. And this is the hope of our nation. But we're starting to realize what our founding fathers understood. James Madison said this. He said, if men were angels, no government would be necessary. How about John Adams? You would love this, Senator. Yeah. The Constitution was created for a moral and religious people. Wait, can we say that? Yeah. And it is wholly inadequate for the governance of any other. Here's what's so interesting. I did this incredible study last year on how democracy ends. So democracy ends through what's called democratic erosion. And what that means is there is an erosion of our ability as citizens to cooperate. Democracy, or maintaining a republic, I was corrected on that yesterday, requires the cooperation of citizens. When citizens can no longer cooperate, and let's understand this, cooperation is a relational skill, right? When citizens can no longer cooperate, democratic erosion begins and democracy ends and authoritarianism begins. Authoritarianism always follows democracy because the majority rules at that point. They rule through power. Okay? So the opposite of democratic erosion is called democratic resilience. And democratic resilience is created in our future citizens in a lot of different places, coaches and mentors and all sorts of things in our church. But more than anything, it's created in the context of families. Families are where you learn how to get along with other people. And democracy requires we get along with other people. So like I'm coming into this family space, like I've completely shifted. No more good boy stuff. Like we need a seat at the table because the health of our future democracy depends on us creating a healthy, robust, resilient, relational future society, of which you see a picture of it right here.
Well, I'll jump in. Thank you very much. Well said. I appreciate the comment, the quote about basically our democracy depends on the character. It comes out of families. It's really important stuff. By the way, George Washington had a quote too. He said, morals and values are the spring of a popular government. So similar idea. Obviously, our founders knew that, right? The work you're doing is extremely important. I would like to work with you more and see what we could do.
Okay. Do we have that on video?
You, Representative, you've led the way, but this is, I think, is the foundation of our society. You know, I've talked about schools. We've talked about some policies. I think we both said that you know, we can't legislate these things. We can do some things to help with it, but I do believe that we want to make our children functioning good citizens and be in a good society, and you can't have a functioning good society without families. So we need to do everything we can to get out of the way of, get things out that are decentralizing families, and then do what we can to enable it. And part of it just the kinds of things that help people understand it is the way to succeed, fact-based, and it is normal, it's doable, but then help them achieve that. And some of that is, as I was saying earlier, teaching, sort of coming out of the desocialization, where they can learn, and we can teach this at schools. That we have it, like I said, we have a TEKS on this. It's just not mandatory, but where we talk about relationships and conflict resolution and those kinds of things. So we can, I think government and things we can do a lot to get out of the way, to promote, to send signals, and to help the church and the family do this, which I think is critical work. Yeah.
So I might add, so I've mentioned my family a little bit. So I'm the youngest of 5, like I said, and most of them live in Amarillo, where I reside. We have one sister that's in Colorado, but we see her often and try to recruit her to Texas. And I was thinking, so several of them are married. We have like several grandkids, nieces and nephews. It's lots of fun. We're all very, very close. And I was preparing for this panel, I was thinking through, like, why am I so close to them? Like, what was it? Because I'm super relational, or, I don't know, I go to their house all the time. Like, where did that start from? And I don't want to, bang a clinging drum, but it really, y'all, it started with how my parents raised me. Like, that's where it began. And so this idea that, I would say that my parents, from probably when I was out of the womb, they were intentional. My mom stayed home. She was involved in our extracurriculars. She was involved in our education. My father was also really present and involved. I can't tell you, he didn't miss a single sporting game. We would take us out to lunch and get to know who we really were, because we're all very different, all 5 of us. And all of those micro moments, there were a lot of moments. It didn't start when I was 20. It started when I, frankly, was out of the womb, and I have 4 older siblings, and there were habits already built, like having dinner every night, and praying together as a family, and being involved in your church, and having other families that believe the same values as you. And all of those elements, and I'm speaking from, when I look out in the crowd, I see, I'm not calling you guys old, but I do see several, I think most of you probably have kids around my age. And I share that, and I'm like, maybe I shouldn't have said that, y'all, I'm sorry. I'm like, ooh. But I share that as a direct product of excellent parents. And I'll tell you, I almost get emotional about it. My dad's actually here today, and and when I think about this topic and the importance of it, y'all, I think about, like, how important your parents are involving. And when I'm now 27, I look back at the 27 years of my life, and I think there's a lot of things I didn't see behind the curtain that my parents were having to figure out. And those of you who don't know me well, but I'm a little stubborn and I'm pretty hard-headed sometimes. And there were a lot of moments in my life growing up that my parents had to sit me down and say, no, we're not doing it this way, and kind of shake it out of me. And discipline, there was structure, there was discipline, there were expectations in the household. And it was for all 5 of my siblings, and they did such a wonderful job of it. And I share that one as an encouragement to parents in the crowd, that I'm a product of, I think, parents that worked really hard. And I don't think necessarily they're perfect, but they were pretty darn close to it, I would say. I think they're pretty perfect. And now as an adult, so I'm engaged to get married. My fiance is also here. And so now I'm getting married in 2 months, and as I'm transitioning into this season of just preparing for marriage and being a wife, I have this, like, I'm not sure if I can put it into words, but I have this, like, I feel like duty to fulfill what my parents did in my life. I feel like I have this, like, they invested a generation and so much time into us 5 kids. I want to carry that out to the next generation, but it started with the parents. And so when we talk about laws, I think they're great. I think they're awesome, and I'm, as a lawmaker, want to, be a part of that movement. But when I look as I'm preparing for marriage, the reason my fiance and I, we don't live together before we got married, and we, did it excellent as well we can, and we had priorities, and we were mindful, of all those things, and that came from our parents. That came from the way they raised us. And I think I would say that parenting and the impact it has on the next generation and kids, I would say, is probably one of the most important roles that we can have on earth.
Can I just pick up on that? Well, great. It was very well said. But good job, Dad, by the way. Excellent job. And congratulations to you on the marriage. Best wishes to you. No, I just have to, it was very touching we talked about, and reminded me of my dad. He did not have a good dad. His mom and his dad were divorced, but I look back now, he chose to be a great dad. He was very intentional, very involved. I was dyslexic. Only kid in my second grade class who couldn't read. He never went to college. He was a fireman. But somehow, just by sheer determination, he found some woman doing a PhD dissertation in dyslexic children in the 60s. No one even knew what that was. Just out of sheer, he wouldn't give up. And he used to say, he'd teach me things about raising kids, I realized. And he would say, the only thing you can give your child is time, things like that. And so I know, I could hear his voice echoing as I brought up my own children. And now, people always feel bad about this, but my son-in-law passed away about 5 years ago. Our grandkids live really close to us, so I essentially play kind of dad to them. So we go almost every night to dinner with them. I think it's so important, and try to remember the things that he taught me, the intentionality of it, and so it's extremely important. Now, policy-wise, I was reading about this panel too and thinking, what can we do? And there was a suggestion to do a commission on boys and men, because to see what's going on with them, to try to help them with gaps in education, to help them with masculinity, to understand this idea that fatherhood's an option where really it's a noble cause, to try to teach that to them. I think we have a problem with fatherhood, and we need to challenge our young men to somehow to step up to that. It's the most rewarding thing they could do, and the most important thing they could do for our society. So thank you. Yeah.
Absolutely. Wow. These are wonderful responses. I'm both tearing up here because I'm about to cough, but also these are just so wonderful. I think from all of this, what can really take away is a fundamental truth, is that happy, flourishing, fulfilled families depend upon happy, flourishing, fulfilled individuals. Those individuals depend upon those families. And Texas, every state in the union, this country, every political community that there is, depends upon the flourishing of every single family. There is no escaping that whatsoever. The good of the family contributes to the common good of the state. And I think from here, every single one of these stories, every single thing that everyone up here has just described, I think it reemphasizes that and reinforces that there is no individual flourishing, there's no communal flourishing without flourishing families. So on that note, thank you all again. We have a little bit of time for just a couple of closing remarks, but actually, we're gonna have to turn to question time at this point. But before we open it up to the audience, I'd like to we have the influencer experience here at TPPF, and I'd like to give one of our influencers in the audience the opportunity to ask our first question.
Okay. I'm not going to stand up because it's a small room and you guys are too close to me. So, my name is Andrea Piankowski, and some of us didn't have the opportunity to have a beautiful family like yours growing up. Some of us grew up in a dysfunctional home with alcohol, drugs, lack of stability, lack of values. And that's where I think the state has to continue educating and promoting the values that we don't get at home. And in my personal situation, even though I didn't have that as a daily life guidance, I pursued that. But I pursued that in survival mode. And when you're in survival mode, you try to be someone because, you don't want to be the reflection of your circumstances, so you work really hard. I became a lawyer back in Venezuela. I became a lawyer here in the US. I'm that kind of woman who drives. But I was also actively looking for someone who was going to be my partner, my home, my safety. And it was really hard to find someone. It took me years because the expectation was that if you're a conservative, you have to just give up your career and your personal goals, stay home, and take care of the kids. So I went on plenty of dates with conservative men who had that expectation, and they honestly didn't feel that attracted to me because of the fact that I was an independent professional. So my question to you is, how do we change that message? Because I see you and you're a professional. And I don't think that because you're going to get married, you're planning on giving up everything that you have built. How do we change that message from the conservative side?
That's a great question. And I'm trying to think of how to answer that. So I guess generally asking about that culture shift where you could be conservative but also be a working woman. Well, look, I'm going to tell you, I just think generally, I think it starts with one living it. Like, you found an amazing, husband, spouse who is great with you being in the job that you're in, and also I assume you might have a kid or a couple kids, and also being a mom. And so I think some of that has to do with, a lot of what we see is like clickbait social media that feeds us, one side against the other, and that Democrats are for this and Republicans are for this. And I'll tell you, we're both living products of, being women. I'm getting married, you're married. We're both involved in jobs, and I think both can exist. I think you have to pick your priorities, though. I think you have to decide, can I work and also still raise my kids and do it well? And I think you can. I know, there's a lot of people in Amarillo that I know that I'm very good friends with that have young babies and they're working, and they prioritize. And look, there's some sacrifices they have to make with work. They may say, I have to go part-time because I want to be home with my kid, or they have parents or family that can help. And so I think, when you talk about culture shifts, I don't know if I have an exact answer of saying, okay, this exact thing is going to shift it. But I think living it out and saying, no, you can do both. But I would make a really important note that I think you still have to prioritize what is most important. For example, like when you talk about, young families having babies or not. And, I was reading Wall Street Journal just yesterday. There's an article out about just basically it's tanking, that people aren't getting married, people aren't having babies. We all know that. And it's interesting, when you look at the data of, if you compare like a wealthy family versus a low-income family, the low-income families are having more babies than the wealthy families. And so this idea that like, oh, I don't want to have kids because it's too expensive is just not true. I think it's all about your priorities. So to your point, I think you have to live it, and you have to also encourage other women to say you can do both, and I think that priority part is important. And I don't know if exact policies impact that. I think it's culturally, we as individuals, and in our churches and our families and our, what we're doing lead with that retrospect. I don't know if that's helpful, but.
Can I jump in there real quick? Yeah. First, my mother was a working woman. This is, back away, so it was a little bit unusual. So when I got married to my wife, that was my expectation. So I started talking about, well, what are you going to do? And I go, this is an even partnership, man. And she goes, I don't want to stay home and have kids. And so I realized that it's we have diversity that's a lot deeper than the color of your skin. It's different people. My mom was that was her thing. That was what she needed to do, and she was still a great mom. My wife, she had a different set of sort of her makeup. And that was what she did. She's very productive at home, so she chose that. So I think we have to, men have to be open to that. And, part of I talked earlier about a commission about young men and boys. I think this is part of it, is to take, if you're going to be a father and you go, well, I'm the breadwinner, and all I really got to do is make money, all that stuff, my wife takes care of with the kids, and I see the kids a little bit, but I'm not that engaged because I'm providing for the family. That's the wrong attitude. So we have to teach them, if they came into the marriage or relationship going, oh, I'm equally responsible for raising these kids, then I think they have a different attitude towards you saying, well, I want to have a career, if that makes any sense. So, yeah.
May I also add one last thing? I actually do think in today's society, we are shifted towards a women work and don't have babies. So I also think we're kind of, I don't want to say we're in that, but that is more so, it is more normal now for women to be working, not have kids, than it is for when my parents, were having kids. Every woman stayed home. And I think both are important. And I think, now it's, if you're stay-at-home mom, sometimes there's like oh, you stay home? Like, what do you do? And I think we have to still prioritize that, stay-at-home moms are their job is important, and the moms that work and do both also are important. I think both can exist and be well.
Thank you. Hi, my name is Liz, and my question, because we talked a little bit, or you spoke a little bit about how after the war, there was the whole baby boom and everything, and people were going back to getting married, and there is kind of that shift, but the difference now is the fact that we have so many options with people. So a little background, I'm originally from California. I grew up in LA, single mom. My dad was in France. Both amazing parents. How they did it, I don't know, amazing. But when I moved to Texas a year ago, it was this huge culture shock for me. Where in LA, all of my friends are getting married later. They're very much focused on their careers. And it's oh, you're 30-something. You're totally young. And here I'm oh, everyone is either, a lot of people that I've met are 34 and already divorced. And I don't know if it's just because we have too many options and there's too much out there for us, because the next best person is just a swipe away. What do we do about that?
Well, I'm a fifth-generation Texan, so I love that you said it's a culture shock. It is a different culture here, and I love Texas. I love our culture in Texas. I think one of the things that we haven't mentioned is how important Hispanic population is to Texas. And I live near San Antonio, and in San Antonio we say familia es todo. Family is everything. Hispanic population hugely prioritizes family. And given the large Hispanic population in Texas, I think that's really good for us. And I think it's very, very important. So I'm glad that we have the culture, we have the fundamental culture that's necessary to be very supportive of this. We need to shift in our public policy efforts towards creating the right kind of policies that speak to the hearts of families. And again, we were talking a little bit earlier about that, is that family policy is a worldly different place than policies that incentivize business. So
real quick on that, the reason I got involved with politics was I felt like there were people trying to tear down the Judeo-Christian family values the country is built on, and I wanted Texas to remain a great place for my grandkids to live. I think part of it, just the difference in one state keeping traditional values and seeing the value of that, and other sort of taking more of the cultural worldly approach. And the difference is, it's interesting you say that. I think I'd rather be Texas. So. Yeah.
Can I jump in there? So Louise Perry is a new name to me. Anybody familiar with Louise Perry? Yeah. She's an interesting lady, isn't she? And she's saying a lot of things that are culturally wow, that's interesting. She said recently, traditions are experiments that worked. Interesting that we're saying that.
Gentleman right here.
Talking about me? Yes, sir. Hey, I thought you'd talk about the guy behind me. Dr. Matt Poling, I'm a family physician and faculty member. And hey, how do we get the other side of the aisle engaged in this? Y'all made the astute observation that strong families need limited government. It's also true that weakened and damaged families need a bigger government. It seems to me a lot of young people, women in particular, young women in particular, are in an abusive relationship with a political party that benefits from them being single, childless, frustrated with the system. How do we reach out to them to get them on board?
Can I speak to that? One of the things that we need to remind ourselves is that Democrats love their kids just as much as we do. And one of the things I said a couple of years ago at the Texas Policy Summit is that I think we need to lay down our swords, go out to coffee with people of the other party, get the pictures out of your kids and grandkids, and talk to each other about what your hopes and dreams are for them. You know what? Let me just say this. There is so much alignment politically around family. There is so much alignment. And one of my favorite historical figures was James Garfield, president in 1880. He lived through one of the most contentious political times in history. People say, well, politics is so rough right now. Well, you remember the caning of Charles Sumter? At least we're not having that in the Texas legislature. But he came up during a very contentious time in politics, and he built all of his political capital on friendships. And he became one of the most effective politicians of his age. I think my goal is that we build a whole new world of family policy built on the foundation of friendship.
Let's see. Gentleman right here. Yes, sir.
Yes, my name's Aaron Tao. Thank you. My name is Aaron Tao. I'm a member of the Austin LLC chapter. And I'm sure you've seen the news reports and the think tank studies showing that young men and young women are drifting further apart politically. Broadly speaking, young men are becoming more right-wing, young women are becoming more left-wing. In your view, how important is it for a marriage partner to share your political views? And then what can be done to create a genuine safe space for couples to meet, talk, and give each other the benefit of doubt? I'm sure you know, like a generation ago, like many Americans married this, like I think I read like 1/3 of Americans met their significant other in the workforce, but you can't do that now with HR and all these political, for obvious reasons. The risks exceed the rewards now. So what could be done to just to restore basic trust and give people the benefit of doubt? So those are my two questions.
It sounds like you have some good thoughts. No. Well, I agree. I do know that men lean more liberal or conservative, women lean more progressive. And I think part of that is we actually have a pretty, I think, when you talk about social media platforms, we have a lot of conservative men leading in this area of politics, showing, and saying vocal things. We don't have as many women, I think, and so I think that does have an impact. I will make one note. You asked about how important it is that people believe the same thing, and I can tell you, I think it is 100% very, very important. I know a lot of people that are, and I'm talking about like someone's Catholic and they date someone who is not a Christian, or they're Baptist Christian and they date someone who's pro-choice. And I'm telling you, it doesn't work out. Because when I think about that, I'm like, so if I date someone who doesn't believe the same things, and then we start raising kids, and we have different viewpoints on the church, on when we go to church, we have a different viewpoint on, does life begin at conception, or is it a choice? And it doesn't work out, because then you're competing about how you raise that kid. And then the other thing is that, as a believer, the faith is what really brings unity to the marriage. Like, that is kind of the core principle of when we talk about getting marriage, is that it's a sacred, commitment to each other, that no matter what you go through, you're committed to each other. And it's not about feelings or how I feel that day. It is a, holy decision before God. And so when you are dating someone who doesn't believe the same things, I have the very strong opinion that it doesn't work out. So.
I agree with that. I mean, my opinion on that is if you're both believers, believe in God, and He's in your life, and that's the major thing you agree on. That I believe for a successful marriage, you have to have that. And if you do, then you can disagree on a lot of other things. But that you can, that bond's tight. You can debate a lot of things, disagree, but that you're going to stay together around the most important thing. So That's my opinion. I don't know how to deal with, fix the thing in the workplace.
Well, an even more dangerous thing is that, my wife likes football and I don't. And that's even more dangerous. But we've worked it out after 42 years because she watches the Dallas Cowboys and I look at her and we're both happy.
All right, we have time for one more question. Right there at the glasses.
My name is Kimberly Brienzi, and I work with a nonprofit called Family Bridge, and we focus on car campers because we don't want children to be living in a homeless state, and it's usually just a transition bridge from car to hopefully something more substantial. My question, I agree with everything you've said about the strength of the family, but most of these families don't have dads that are participating typically, and they can't afford housing, period. So, and it's not always that they're addicted, it's not always that they've had mental issues. Sometimes it's just hardworking moms trying to support their children, and they can't find reasonable housing because they have to pay for childcare and food first, and then housing is kind of their last choice. So to strengthen the family, how do we make this come full circle and make housing more affordable, which we've tried to tackle in the past and have not done successfully?
Well, overall, go ahead.
Well, first off, I hate that we have, things like this in our world. It breaks my heart. I know there's a ministry I'm involved in Amarillo that has similar situations, and it's heartbreaking because it is a reality that you have families that don't have the mom and dad, and they're at home 6 p.m. and giving dinner. And so we as, I think government and lawmakers can help assist. I know that, thankfully we have a lot of nonprofits and organizations like you that come in and help. I think that's a lot of it. I think thankfully we have churches that do a lot of outreach. I'm not saying that fixes the whole issue because that will, and to some degree, always exist in a broken world. And so I'm so glad we have people like you who are investing to empower because they need that. When we talk about affordable housing, I will tell you next session, property tax relief, that will be a huge push. I mean, we do need to allow relief for property tax owners. We know that the governor, that's a huge issue. I think it will be the #1 issue. So I can tell you next session, I think there will be a lot of focus on how can we make sure that young people can buy houses, because now you see people buying homes. I think the age is like 35 or 40. People are no longer in their 20s buying homes. And so that is a real issue that we have to make sure we have affordable housing. I think next session will be a big focus. So you should follow up with me and I'll give you more stats in a year. And then the other thing is I do think there are ways that government can assist in saying, how do we help these nonprofits? How do we have programs that help, women and moms raise a family? Because it is a real thing that we have to be sure. I know that we have some laws where you can, apply for grants and things like that assist, but there obviously is more work that we should look into because, yeah, it's a real issue.
Excellent. All righty, well, we've hit our last 5 minutes of our panel. And to close, I'd like to first thank each one of our panelists. Thank you for your remarks. Very illuminating. I know I felt very illuminated. I'm sure our audience did as well. And I'd like to also thank our in-person attendees, all of you for being here, our online attendees. And again, it's just as a closing remark as we wrap up, probably the most important, the most essential thing, I think, for everyone to remember from this panel is that our families are essential for Texas. If Texas is going to succeed, if we're going to ever achieve a common good of Texas, it depends on the good of each and every single family and the good of each and every single family member across domains. That's spiritual, educational, physical, mental. Every part of the person needs to be cultivated, and it's best cultivated in the family. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us this afternoon. Please join us in the Zlotnick Ballroom for our ending panel with Board Czar Tom Homan. And when you go down, please do remember to have your little neck wallet ID badge. You will need that to get into the panel. Thanks again to our panelists, and thank you all again for attending.